The coup has officially begun. These chilling words, whispered in the digital ether and amplified across political commentary, were not a declaration of fact in early 2023. They were a symbolic, urgent warning about a democratic backsliding so profound, so insidious, it threatened to redefine a nation. This was no thunderous military takeover, no dramatic collapse under external siege. This was an internal erosion, a quiet unraveling from within. This documentary serves as a critical examination, a stark warning to citizens, a call to conscience for politicians, a challenge to academics, and a mandate for journalists. It is about a collapse that doesn't make a sound until everything gives way at once. It is the profound shift in a nation's very foundations, observed by a world increasingly uncertain of its role, and by adversaries keenly watching for weakness. For decades, Israel stood as a fortress, a beacon of resilience amidst regional chaos. Born from the ashes of the Holocaust, forged in the crucible of conflict, it cultivated formidable military might and mastered complex diplomacy. Survival was not merely a strategy, it was the very essence of its identity, a collective ethos binding its diverse populace. This narrative, deeply rooted in Zionist ideals, emphasized unity, self-reliance, and an unwavering commitment to security. It fostered a unique blend of pioneering spirit and technological innovation, transforming a barren land into a vibrant, modern state. For generations, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, served not just as a military, but as a melting pot, a unifying institution where differences were often subsumed by a shared purpose, the defense of the homeland. Yet, even the strongest walls can crack, not from external assault, but from within. Inside the borders, a profound rift is widening, not primarily between Israel and its traditional adversaries, but between Israelis themselves. This schism cuts across ideological, religious, and socioeconomic lines, manifesting in every facet of public life. Courtrooms clash with deeply held religious and political ideologies. The military strains under unprecedented political pressure, and a younger generation questions the very foundational principles upon which they were raised. And outside, the world is watching with growing unease. What was once perceived as an unshakable democratic outpost in a volatile region now appears increasingly fractured. Its internal struggles cast a long shadow over its international standing, challenging the narrative of a unified, resilient nation. This challenge comes not from its enemies, but from its own citizens, from its own leaders. Judicial reform, two seemingly innocuous words that, beginning in early January 2023, ignited the streets of Israel with an intensity rarely witnessed. What began as a legislative proposal by the newly formed right-wing government quickly escalated into a profound constitutional crisis, a war over the very definition of Israeli democracy. Protesters, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, swarmed the boulevards of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other cities, waving not flags of rebellion, but the blue and white national flag, emblazoned with a clear warning: democracy or dictatorship. The proposed reforms sought to significantly curtail the power of the Supreme Court, limiting its ability to strike down legislation, and granting the governing coalition greater control over judicial appointments. For proponents, these changes were essential to rebalance power, asserting the will of the elected majority and reigning in what they perceived as an activist, unelected judiciary. They argued that the Supreme Court had overstepped its bounds, interfering in political decisions and imposing a secular liberal agenda on a society that was increasingly conservative and religious. However, for opponents, these reforms represented an existential threat to Israel's democratic character. In a nation without a formal constitution, the Supreme Court has historically served as a crucial check on executive and legislative power, safeguarding minority rights and upholding the rule of law. Stripping the court of its independence, they argued, would dismantle the delicate system of checks and balances, paving the way for an unchecked parliamentary majority and potentially leading to an authoritarian state. The protests were not merely about legal oversight, they were about identity, about the soul of the nation. Urban liberals, largely secular and economically prosperous, chanted for the preservation of individual freedoms and democratic norms. Ultra-religious blocs and nationalist settlers, often marginalized by the secular establishment, demanded tradition, religious law, and the assertion of their political power. The clash was visceral, a raw expression of the deep ideological divides that have long simmered beneath the surface of Israeli society. Amidst the shouting, a profound question echoed in every household, in every public square. What kind of country is this becoming? Is it a liberal democracy, a Jewish state governed by religious law, or something else entirely? This internal struggle, far from being a mere political debate, exposed the fundamental tensions inherent in Israel's dual identity as both a Jewish and a democratic state. Once the sacrosanct spine of Israeli unity, the IDF now faces something unprecedented: profound division from within. For decades, military service was a rite of passage, a shared experience that transcended social, economic, and political divides, fostering a powerful sense of national cohesion. The IDF was seen as apolitical, a professional force dedicated solely to the nation's security. This perception was a cornerstone of public trust and national morale. However, the judicial overhaul and the government's broader policies shattered this delicate equilibrium. Elite reserve units, comprising pilots, intelligence officers, and special forces operatives, such as the widely publicized refusal of service by dozens of Israeli Air Force reservists in March 2023, became very backbone of Israel's operational readiness, began to refuse to serve, or threatened to do so, in protest against what they viewed as a fundamental assault on democratic principles. These were not draft dodgers or conscientious objectors. These were highly trained, dedicated individuals who had risked their lives for the country, now driven by a profound moral conviction that they could not serve a government they believed was dismantling the very democracy they swore to protect. Veterans, revered figures in Israeli society, spoke out publicly against government overreach, warning of the catastrophic implications of a politicized military. The army, once a unifying force, became a battleground for ideological conflict. This internal strife has tangible consequences. It erodes military readiness, undermines morale, and critically, weakens the nation's deterrence posture. In a region where adversaries like Hamas, Hezbollah, and a resurgent Iran lurk on every border, the cost of a fragmented defense could be catastrophic. Warfare has fundamentally changed. These adversaries, often state-sponsored but operating with asymmetric tactics, understand they cannot defeat Israel through conventional force. Instead, they aim to exhaust it, to exploit its internal divisions, and to turn its strength into a burden. Tunnels, drones, sophisticated cyber attacks, and relentless disinformation campaigns are their weapons. Each skirmish, each rocket barrage, each act of terror is designed to feel endless, to drain resources, and to exacerbate the internal fissures. The politicization of the IDF, once unthinkable, now presents what many military analysts regard as a growing strategic vulnerability that its enemies are keenly observing and potentially exploiting. The erosion of trust between the military and the government, and within the ranks themselves, poses an existential threat to a nation that has always relied on its unified defense. The tremors of political instability quickly reverberated through Israel's once booming economy. The nation, often hailed as the startup nation, built its prosperity on innovation, attracting global investment and fostering a vibrant tech sector. This economic miracle was predicated on stability, a robust legal framework, and a perception of democratic resilience. However, the judicial overhaul shattered this confidence. International credit rating agencies issued warnings, citing increased political risk and potential damage to the rule of law. Foreign investors, wary of an unpredictable legal environment, began to pull back, or at least pause new commitments. The very entrepreneurs and tech leaders who fueled Israel's economic engine became vocal critics, many threatening to relocate their businesses and talent abroad. The brain drain became a tangible fear, as highly skilled professionals, disillusioned by the political climate, explored opportunities elsewhere. This exodus of human capital, coupled with declining foreign investment, threatened to stifle innovation and reverse decades of economic growth. The long-term implications for employment, national income, and the standard of living are dire, impacting every citizen. For politicians, the economic consequences are a stark reminder that ideological pursuits cannot ignore practical realities. For citizens, the threat to their livelihoods and future prosperity is a deeply personal concern. Academics are left to analyze the complex interplay between political stability and economic vitality, while journalists must meticulously report on the unfolding economic crisis, connecting the dots between policy and pocketbook. Israel's internal turmoil did not go unnoticed on the global stage. Its traditional allies, particularly the United States and European nations, expressed growing concern, urging a return to consensus and the preservation of democratic norms. These diplomatic statements, once rare and carefully worded, became more frequent and pointed, reflecting genuine alarm. The nation's standing as a reliable democratic partner in a volatile region began to erode. International bodies and human rights organizations intensified their scrutiny, highlighting concerns about minority rights and the rule of law. This shift in perception threatened to isolate Israel, making it harder to forge new alliances, maintain existing ones, and garner support for its security needs. Adversaries, meanwhile, seized upon the internal divisions as a sign of weakness. State and non-state actors alike amplified disinformation campaigns, portraying Israel as a nation in decline, consumed by internal strife. This narrative undermined Israel's deterrence posture and emboldened those who seek to destabilize the region. The diplomatic tightrope Israel has always walked became even more precarious. For politicians, the challenge is to navigate this complex international landscape while addressing domestic crises. For academics, it's an opportunity to study the impact of internal political dynamics on foreign policy and international relations. Journalists bear the responsibility of accurately reporting these complex geopolitical shifts, ensuring that citizens understand the global implications of their nation's choices. Beyond the headlines and protests, a deeper, more insidious damage was being wrought: the erosion of trust. Trust between citizens and their government, between different segments of society, and even within families. The political polarization seeped into every aspect of daily life, turning neighbors into adversaries and fracturing long-held social bonds. The media, often a mirror of society, became a battleground itself, accused of bias from all sides. Disinformation flourished, amplified by social media, making it increasingly difficult for citizens to discern truth from propaganda. This breakdown in shared reality further deepened the divides, making constructive dialogue almost impossible. The very fabric of Israeli society, once unified by a shared sense of purpose and collective memory, began to fray. The concept of a shared destiny seemed to recede, replaced by a bitter struggle for dominance. This internal fragmentation, if left unchecked, poses the most profound long-term threat, undermining the very cohesion necessary for a nation to thrive. For citizens, this is a call to introspection, to seek common ground and rebuild bridges. For politicians, it is a stark warning about the consequences of divisive rhetoric and the imperative of responsible leadership. Academics must analyze the sociological impact of such profound societal rifts, while journalists have a critical role in fostering informed public discourse and combating the spread of misinformation. The coup was not a single event, but a process, a slow, deliberate erosion of democratic norms, institutional checks, and societal cohesion. The warnings, once whispers, have become a deafening roar. Israel stands at a precipice, its future hanging in the balance, not from external threats, but from the choices made within its own borders. This is a critical moment for every citizen, every politician, every academic, and every journalist. The path forward demands courage, compromise, and a profound recommitment to the democratic principles that have sustained the nation. The time for complacency is over. The time for decisive action, for a collective reckoning, is now. We urge you, engage with the facts, demand accountability from your leaders, and participate actively in shaping your nation's future. Support independent journalism that seeks truth, challenge misinformation, and foster dialogue across divides. For politicians, this is a solemn call to statesmanship, to prioritize the nation's long-term stability over short-term political gain. For academics, continue to analyze, to inform, and to propose solutions. For journalists, your role is more vital than ever. Be the vigilant guardians of truth, the unwavering voice of critical inquiry. The future of a nation, and indeed, the very idea of a democratic Jewish state depends on it.